When it comes to the Denver Broncos 2025 season, there's big expectations, which means pressure. Who has the most pressure on this team? That conversation's coming up in 5 seconds. All right, Broncos country, time to talk about offseason expectations and pressure from within the organization. And I want to tell you why I'm having this conversation. It's based off of a simple sentence said by owner Greg Penner. Greg Penner said this, what are we going on, a month ago, a couple months ago, whenever the season was wrapping up. And he talked about what the Broncos were able to accomplish this year. That's become a wild card team, heck, win double-digit football games, get into the playoffs, and yeah, I know that the playoffs didn't go the way anybody wanted them to go with the beatdown they took in Buffalo. But after that, Greg Penner said, now we take the next step, which is naturally winning double-digit games, getting back into the postseason, this time winning a postseason game. So that's the expectation. That creates pressure. There's now pressure for a second-year quarterback to not just get back to the playoffs, but win a game. Pressure for third-year Broncos head coach, but a lot of time in the NFL, Sean Payton, to continue to prove to me, to everybody out there in Broncos country, that he made the right pick with Bo Nix. There's also a lot of pressure on Vance Joseph. And that's where I want to start with who has the most pressure on him, right? So if I had a list of pressure, it would go VJ 1, Sean 2, Bo Nix 3. And then there are a couple other players I want to talk about a little later on here. But those three are the top dogs. And VJ, first and foremost, for very obvious reasons, right? That defense, after the slaughter in South Beach a couple years ago when they gave up 10 touchdowns, and they called the dogs off, or else they would have set an NFL record on the Broncos. After that, VJ figured some stuff out. And then you go back to a year ago, well, his defense had 63 sacks to lead the NFL. Nick Bonitto was an emerging star and ended up being a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year as a third-year player. That's a big, big gap that they closed from year one to year two as Vance from the defensive coordinator. But go back and look at some of those numbers. Those 63 sacks were great. The sack total at 13.5 and a couple defensive touchdowns for Nick Bonitto were great. You remember the PS2 pick sixes, right? Especially that one versus the Raiders. They had moments for sure. But when they got to the final 4 weeks, really that first week in December and then go to the end of the regular season, that defense was not the same. And I know Riley Moss was hurt. I want to give Vance that reason, but not an excuse. Because you should have depth there. That goes into picking Jahdae Barron and the emergence of Chris Abrams-Drain, whatever that may turn into in the near future. But in December, they were not that same football team. And then we watched what happened in Buffalo. Now, I get it's Josh Allen and the Bills, and they're not just some run-of-the-mill chump football team. They're a real contender for the Super Bowl. But they gave up, 31 points while only scoring 7? The defense fell off, and they fell off in a big way the final 4 to 6 weeks of the season, which includes that wild card weekend. So VJ has the most pressure because I believe if Vance does not perform, if this defense falls off a cliff the way they did the final 4 or 5 weeks, he's fired. He's out of here. If it performs at the level that it had before the latter part of the season, where they're having 63 sacks, where Nick Bonitto's making a name for himself, well, Vance is going to get interviewed for a head coaching job. So the most pressure, it has to be the guy that gets fired if the results aren't there. That's VJ. Next up is Sean Payton. Sean Payton still has a ton of pressure. He does this to himself a little bit with some of the things that he says of, hey, we're going to be a problem, right? That was something he said going into at the end of last year. He said at the end of that Buffalo game, yeah, we were really hoping to win this game because we liked our chances against the next opponent. That was the Chiefs. That was the Chiefs that he was talking about. So he's confident, and he's creating this own pressure for himself. But I think the moment he picked Bo Nix as the sixth quarterback, but him believing he was the second best, because they like Jaden Daniels a lot down there too. But Bo Nix was their second pick. There's still pressure for him to prove himself right via the play of Bo Nix. So VJ's got pressure because his butt's going to get fired if he doesn't meet expectations. Sean's not going to get fired, but I think if Bo were to regress or the offense were to regress, if they don't run the damn football, right? Run it bigger, Sean. I think there'll be questions about who he is as a head coach. But outside of like Sean Payton haters, and everybody's got somebody hating on him, I don't think anybody with common sense behind them is going to call for Sean Payton to get fired. That's why he's number 2. And then number 3 is Bo Nix, because there's always pressure when you're an NFL quarterback. There's always pressure when you're the Broncos quarterback, because this city is a Broncos town first and foremost. And he's embraced all of that. So far, so good for Bo. But if he were to regress or have that, sophomore slump that we always talk about, there'll be some questions about who he is long-term, because you could talk yourself into being like, hey, Bo's going to be the quarterback here for a decade minimum. Decade and a half if things go the right way. But if he were to take a step back, that timeline just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. I don't think that's going to happen, but there's still the unknown about who Bo Nix is in that second year. So VJ, because he gets fired. Sean, because he's put his reputation basically on Bo Nix and this Broncos offense. And by the way, he picked Marvin Mims. He picked Troy Franklin. He picked R.J. Harvey. He had George Payton's a part of the process, but those offensive players picked in earlier rounds, those are Sean's picks. I think everybody knows that when it comes to the Broncos. So he's not just Bo, but all those players I just rattled off, he's got something to prove with those guys too. And then as far as other players that, I don't know that second-tier players is kind of disrespectful, but for lack of a better term, underneath Bo Nix, players that have pressure on them. Well, let me start with somebody on VJ's side of the ball, Riley Moss. Riley Moss, and as I mentioned, the defense dropped when Riley got hurt, but that's something else Riley has to do. I know it's the NFL. Your injury rate in the NFL is 100%. It is only a matter of time. So everybody's going to get hurt and have to deal with something. But what Riley struggled to do, and maybe this is because he came back too fast and it's something he'll learn via the process, you can't come back and be a shell of yourself. You can't come back and even be 2/3 of yourself. Maybe it's because he thought he was going to lose a spot. You don't want to get Wally pipped, right? But you can't come back and be the worst player on the defense. And I think you can make the argument that that's what Riley was when he came back from the injury. And if you're hurt, my man, don't play. But if you are hurt and you take that jersey, you can no longer use the excuse of injury, because you take the jersey. You're playing. You're okay to take it. Well, then I don't want to hear about that. So you add what he wasn't when he came back with the 20th overall pick of Shadé Barron from the Denver Broncos, University of Texas. They let Riley know that they need more out of him by that pick right there. There's some pressure on Riley Moss. Now on the offensive side of the ball, 2 names on that side of the ball. They're actually both running backs, Tyler Bidet and Audric Estime. Tyler Bidet, I don't know how much pressure's on a guy like Tyler, because he's always just a practice squad body. And, did anybody have real high expectations for Tyler Bidet? We didn't even know his name was Bidet until last year. So no, we didn't have high expectations for him. But I think there's some pressure on him to keep his, keep his name relevant in Broncos country. Keep his stock somewhat high with the coaches and Sean Payton. So he's got some pressure to perform, get himself on the active roster instead of being one of those Sunday mornings, hey, look at that, Tyler Bidet got activated and is going to get a game day jersey. The other running back is Audric Estime, and that's some real pressure. I mentioned VJ, succeed or get fired. I actually think Audric Estime is in that same sort of boat. You succeed, or there's a chance this guy might get cut. He's a 5th-round pick now. There's no guarantees at all in the NFL after about the 2nd, maybe 3rd round, depending on what position you are. But a 5th-round pick, there's no saving grace for you just because you're a draft pick of the Denver Broncos. Now, we did hear reports. Our buddy Mike Kliss, our very own Andrew Mason, writing at denversports.com about what Sean said with Tyler Bidet, with Audric Estime, with all these running backs. Like, they're all on alert now that R.J. Harvey was picked in the 2nd round. If your team basically picks your replacement with their 2nd pick in the draft, your eyes should pop a little bit. You should be on alert. It means they're not satisfied with what you're doing. And if you're a Broncos fan, unless your last name's Estime or Bidet, how are you satisfied with what either of those guys did a year ago? Now, Tyler gets a bit of a pass because of the serious back injury in, where was he at? New York, I think, when he suffered that. But outside of that, he still has never really reached his ceiling or fit the bill as an NFL running back. So those are the guys I think have pressure on them. VJ first and foremost. Sean Payton is up next on that list. Then Bo Nix. And then, like I said, kind of a lower tier, and I'm trying not to make that like disrespectful, but a lower tier is Riley Moss, Audric Estime, and then, of course, Tyler Bidet, who I'm mentioning right there. I think Evan Ingram, there's a little bit of pressure as a guy that he's supposed to be Joker, right, and check that box that they've been searching for since Sean Payton became the head coach. But at 30 years old, I mean, how much pressure are you going to put on a 30-year-old tight end, right? 30 is kind of that line of demarcation. Like, you're on the wrong side of it once you're over here. You're on the right side of it if you're under that. So there's some pressure to check that Joker box. But I don't want to look at Evan Ingram as, hey, you're either a 1,000-yard receiver with 6, 7, 8 touchdowns, or you're a failure, because I'm not sure he's going to get to that number. I think what Evan's skill brings is opening up other things for younger players like Mims, Franklin, R.J. Harvey, Cortland on the outside, still getting some one-on-one opportunities. That's what Evan's role will be. But some pressure for Evan Ingram. I'd love to hear what you think of my names. I'd love to hear the names that you have. Go ahead and leave a comment with some of those names. Like and subscribe while you're here. I always try to circle back and hang out with you guys, talk a little bit, mix it up in the comment section. So hopefully we can do that with some of your comments. If you're ever looking for me on social media, follow me at Joshua Dover. I'm on Instagram at Joshua Dover Radio. If you're on the gram, let's kick it over there. And as always, check out the radio show 10 to 2. Me and Cecil Lammy over on 104.3 The Fan. This has been Dover on Denver, and now I'm done.